Three words: Senate, Rob Ford. Andrew's here in Toronto tonight. Chantel's in Montreal. Bruce is in Ottawa. Let's start on the Senate. 48 hours ago, the three controversial senators were suspended from their seats, and one has to wonder if that means the air is starting to go out of the Senate story balloon. Chantel, is it?
Well, it may be fluctuating, but it's certainly not going to go out on that account. There's still an RCMP hearing, the Auditor General looking into it, then whatever Nigel Wright has to say. I think what was basically accomplished over this episode is the Prime Minister managed to lift the Senate controversy, which had fallen within the parliamentary bubble, onto the water coolers of the nation, and I guess that could be considered an accomplishment for the opposition.
Well, I want to isolate two clips from the last 24 hours, both happening in question period, a time which is still dominated by this story. And here's the first one, happened today between Ralph Goodale of the Liberal Party and Paul Calandra, who's the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary. Watch this.
Mr. Speaker, more obfuscation. Chris Woodcock appears at the centre of a cash for repayment cover-up that involved Duffy, Wright, Gerstein, Perrin, Hamilton, Byrne, Rogers, Novak, Van Hemmen, LeBreton, Tkachuk, Stuart Olson, the Prime Minister's entire entourage for more than 3 months. And yet the Prime Minister noticed nothing, was told nothing, asked nothing, did nothing to head off a criminal conspiracy right under his nose. And it's still going on. Why is Chris Woodcock still being paid by taxpayers?
Again, Mr. Speaker, we're assisting with the RCMP in this. The Prime Minister's office is under no investigation.
All right, I ran the whole clip because that's kind of what question period's like now. The long, detailed questions from the opposition, short answer, usually the same answer from the government, whether it's the parliamentary secretary or, in fact, the Prime Minister. Bruce, what is this doing to the story?
Well, I think there's a lot more still to come in this story. I agree that it may fluctuate from day to day, but I think one of the ironies of the Prime Minister having accomplished his stated objective of seeing these senators suspended is that the story has now become simply the Harper story. It is really about the way that he has conducted himself, the way he's managed his office, the way he's managed the political reputation of the government and the party. And we're going to see a lot more questions about all of that list of people that Ralph Goodale spoke about today. And I think the other thing about it is that by choosing Paul Calandra and by advising him to answer these questions or not answer these questions the way that he's been doing, I think this is adding oxygen to this issue as well. I don't think it's working for the government. I think it's actually working for the opposition, because every voter that sees what's going on knows what they're seeing. They're seeing a legitimate question being asked, an important question. Survey after survey is telling us that people think that this is important, that these questions deserve answers, and they're getting really, really poor efforts to obfuscate and avoid accountability.
Well, they seem to be using the same strategy they've done in the past. I mean, before Calandra, there was Del Mastro. Before Del Mastro, there was Poilievre. The same kind of situation in trying to dismiss questions from the opposition. The other clip I want to run is from yesterday, and it's where the Speaker kind of involved himself in the whole issue of what kind of questions should be allowed, and how Tom Mulcair of the NDP responded to that. Watch this.
I see the Right Honourable Prime Minister rising to answer the question. I just want to remind members that there have been many Speaker's rulings about the clear delineation between party activity and government activity.
Mr. Speaker, just to be clear, perfectly clear, this is about a cover-up in the Prime Minister's office. This is government business. This is the public's business.
All right, Andrew, what did that one tell us?
A good moment for Mulcair, a bad moment for the Speaker. The issue is legitimate, but his application of it, this has happened a couple of times in the past, is sometimes inexplicable. He pops up every now and then to say it, but it doesn't seem to be done with any consistency. And, of course, if you're going to start ruling questions out of order that way, there's a lot you can do on the answer front as well, and speakers in other parliaments do. So I don't think he's acquired a good reputation here for applying that in a judicious way. I will say, though, just back to what you were talking about earlier, I think much more damage is being done to the Prime Minister and to the government by Tom Mulcair's questioning than Ralph Goodale's. Ralph Goodale's was a more traditional question period type of question. It makes a good clip, but it's those short, pointed, factual questions that Mulcair keeps asking and that the Prime Minister keeps declining to answer when there's no reason why he couldn't answer them. And I have to say that over the last few weeks, this is one of the great parliamentary performances I think I've seen in decades from Tom Mulcair. This is the way question period is supposed to work. He is doing a service by continuing to ask these questions of the Prime Minister.
I want to get back to my original point with Chantal, which is, you know, stories need oxygen to keep going. With the senators out of play from the Senate, with the Mounties dealing with what they deal, and it's not like the Mounties leak the information they're getting. How much longer can things survive in question period when really they're asking, they may be good questions, trying to get things on the record, but without new information, if there is new information, how does the story carry on? Chantal?
I think, listening to question period today, I think the opposition basically is setting up the government for later. I think there is a sense that, yes, in question period, we are not going to have a replay every second day, but they are asking all kinds of questions and putting names in play in the expectation that at some point more oxygen will come from the RCMP, from some of the players in this saga, and at that point they will ask the Prime Minister to apply the same scale of justice to people who may be closer to him, if that happens, that he applied to those 3 senators who happened to be in his way this week. So I think there is a sense that this is for later. I just want to mention one anecdote. I was speaking to a group today about federal politics. Deliberately, I did not speak about the Senate because I was curious to see if the story still had legs. And the first question I got was, why didn't you talk to us about the Senate?
I guess it's still got legs.
A bit, at least.
Yeah. Okay. I want to show you something else that happened today. It was at a news conference that the Minister of Finance gave, Jim Flaherty. We saw a hint of it in the news earlier. But he was asked about Rob Ford, the Rob Ford story. And I know the 3 of you, like most Canadians, have been watching this, even though it's really not your beat. But Flaherty, who is a friend of the family, and clearly a friend of Rob Ford's, had been a friend, sat with Rob Ford's father in the provincial legislature, I believe. But here's how he answered what he thought. And somebody asked him, what should Rob Ford do? Watch this.
Yeah, I am close with the family. I am. He'll have to. The mayor will have. I mean, at the end of the day, he has to make his own decision about what he ought to do. Certainly his family is helping him and wishing him well. That's all I can say.
All right, a tough spot for Jim Flaherty. This whole Rob Ford story and the connections, I mean, there kind of are some connections to Ottawa. You know, the Prime Minister was, you know, appeared with Rob Ford. Many of his cabinet ministers have. Is there anything we should be thinking in terms of that connection, Andrew?
Well, there's some parallels in the way that they've been dealing with their respective difficulties, if you will, which is that they have not been forthcoming. They've tried to stick it out and stonewall, et cetera, and it's not working in either case in the larger scheme of things. But they're being kind of willed on by that and supported, I suppose, by a hardcore of supporters who will stick with them no matter what, for whom no amount of evidence, no matter what, will convince them. And that's disturbing, that when there's a base of the population that simply, you know, will not look at the facts that are staring them in front of the face because of that kind of loyalty, that's difficult to manage in a democracy.
Bruce?
Well, I think on one level, they couldn't be more different as people, just in terms of the way that they conduct themselves in the public eye. Mr. Harper and Mr. Ford are really quite different. I think it's sad on a human level to watch Mr. Ford deal with the demons that he's dealing with. But if there is a parallel, in my view, it's similar to the point that Andrew made, which is that both Mr. Harper and Mr. Ford came into politics as outsiders, committed to the idea that they weren't going to be career politicians, that the institutions and the purpose of the institutions was going to be more important than anything else. And here we have them both in a situation where they seem to be doing everything to avoid the kind of accountability that they would have been very, very critical of in terms of the politicians who preceded them.
Chantal?
I see another kind of parallel. I think that from the perspective of Stephen Harper and Jim Flaherty and the Conservatives who are strategists in Ottawa, the Ford coalition is the Harper Coalition. It's made up of the same kind of voters. It is the voters that they were looking for, and I think that there is a sense on Parliament Hill that these voters that elected Rob Ford are faithful to him, are the voters that gave the Conservatives, if not their majority, at least a breakthrough in Toronto, which was really important for this Prime Minister. And they see the Ford constituency as kind of a microcosm of the Conservative base. And that means that they are very much stuck between the rock of their floating principles, if you can have floating rocks, and the hard place of the people that they think get them elected.
I've only got a couple of minutes left, but when you move away from the personalities involved in both these stories, the Toronto and the Ottawa one, are they telling us something about our democracy and how it works these days?
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead, Andrew.
There's been long-standing problems of a lack of accountability mechanisms. We've relied a lot, as I've said before, on decent chaps running things. And when decent chaps either aren't decent chaps or aren't running things, we run into difficulty. We don't have the kind of institutionalized mechanisms. In Toronto's case, they simply can't remove the mayor from his job, and we've got to work on that.
Yeah, but the only problem is, and I'm not disagreeing that there is something going on in Toronto, but we have just spent 2 weeks saying that you need due process in the Senate to remove people. And we cannot turn around and not create due process that is based on some line that everyone can recognize. And it's not all that easy to figure out before you go to legislation to remove people.
Yeah, I agree. It shouldn't be ad hoc. I agree.
Bruce?
Well, I've been traveling a bit this week, Peter, and everywhere I've gone, I've had the experience of realizing that people are more engaged in this Senate Harper, Duffy, Wright issue, and they're coming at it from a number of standpoints. Yes, there's people who say the most important thing is let's abolish the Senate, and some are really frustrated with the stories of spending. But I'm finding more and more people are interested in this whole question of what are we doing from a governance standpoint? Are we setting some precedents that we shouldn't be setting? Is due process being delivered in our system? So I see more engagement by Canadians on this story, which I think is a good thing, and it remains to be seen how the story will play itself out. But so far, I think it's been for the better.
All right. We'll leave it at that. Good discussion. Thank you all. Bruce in Ottawa, Chantel's in Montreal, and Andrew here in Toronto.